her, yeah, and her ringtone is warning, warning, it's the light, it's the light. Well, there we go. It's time. Good evening, everyone. I'm about to begin this meeting, study session for January 10th, isn't it? And got my glasses on, so I can't see. Yep. January 10th, 2023. Before we do, I'm going to stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. Anyone who'd like to join me, please feel free to do so. Join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, I got the short seat again. All right, first item on the agenda is TSP presentation for regarding director search qualifications. Dr. Grissom, you are on board.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer, and Happy New Year to all the board. Thank you for having me back. Before Christmas, we emailed the board the copy of the results of the survey that was sent out. We had 2,875 responses to the survey, and there were lots of pages. We provided you the comments verbatim. And then, as you recall, in the survey, we had personal characteristics that we asked respondents to rank and rate, and we provided those to you as well. At your seats in the white folder, if you'll open those up, to the right, there is the sample brochure. It's our draft brochure. If you'll look on the first page, it says selection criteria. This criteria came from the results of the survey, and these were the top 10 of those. I believe there was 21 items that people could rank among personal characteristics in a superintendent. So on that first page, it's listed at the very beginning the minimum qualifications, and according to your board policy, you require a bachelor's degree. That's what the law states. However, this board can choose to add more minimum qualifications as you deem necessary. As I spoke with most all of you, some of you would like to require a doctorate. So that's a discussion that Chairman Brewer, you all need to have if you want to change any of your minimum qualifications. The selection criteria, you need to decide if you want to make any edits to that. The next page is just a little information about your school district and the community, some system facts. And then the third page is the application process for all of those candidates wishing to apply for this position. Also, as a part of the survey, we gave respondents an opportunity, if they had someone that they thought should apply, they could list that. We got, I believe it was around 129 different candidates that we will, once the board approves the vacancy brochure, we will send a letter to all of those folks saying that you've been recommended to apply. And so they'll need to follow the same process that's listed in the brochure on the last page. As I mentioned to you before, candidates need to submit their credentials through our online portal. So that's how we accept those applicant materials. Also, several of you mentioned other names that you might, those will all be included in the recommendation letters as well. Pat, did you have your hand raised?
I wanted to ask a question. Out of how many of those that you have doctorates?
I didn't look. People have just given us their names. So most of them, I don't even know who they are myself. So they've not submitted their application.
Yeah.
Their name was just submitted with either an email address or a phone number. The other piece, Chairman Brewer, that we need as the board, I think you all are meeting next week, the timeline for this search. I think it's appropriate for you all to have a timeline to keep you on pace, to make sure that the search process, everyone's aware of the process, when we will be accepting applications according to the brochure. We have a deadline. The deadline's mainly for our office, but the deadline we have set is February the 17th for interested candidates to get their materials to us. Our job as your search firm is also to recruit as well. So we can recruit up to the deadline and even after the deadline. We have if you'll look at the timeline, you'll adopt the criteria, and that's basically that's January the 17th at your regularly scheduled board meeting. And also at that time, you'll need to approve this vacancy brochure and any edits you have and the timeline. The next box says select candidates on February the 28th. That would be the date that, and these are just proposed dates, that I would come back and present the top finalists for you all to interview. February the 28th. And I just randomly made up these dates just to get you all started. The next one is interview candidates, March the 6th through the 10th. Then the next week, you all would consider each of the candidates that you interviewed. Hopefully to have someone voted on and for you all to offer a contract by March 20th. Make the announcement of your new superintendent by April 3rd and the new superintendent to assume the new position on July the 1st. So those dates were just, Chairman Brewer, I just honestly made up just to get started on the timeline.
I think they look good. That's a good timeline, I think. Miss Andrews.
Is there any more to your presentation?
I'm sorry.
Is there any more to your presentation?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for this. Thank you for providing all the information to us. I think that looking at the timeline, I do think that we'll have to maybe adjust some of the dates. Just pulling up and looking at our district calendar and our board schedule and so forth. I think we need to be aware of those, and we'll probably have to make adjustments. For instance, the week of March 13th through the 17th is our spring break. Something like we need to be mindful of that as we're looking as far as, interviewing, and then we would be out of school for a week and so forth. So just saying that. Also looking at it and kind of processing through it. I know at our next meeting, we need to approve the criteria to be able to post. I've spent quite a bit of time looking at other districts and looking at our current policy, and I think we need to, at this same time, evaluate our policy. Mr. Johnson, I'd requested copies of the TSBA sample policies. Were you able to get those printed? So Jennifer at TSBA was able to give me the sample policies for 5.802 and 5.801. So a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, we went through an extensive process of redoing our board policy. TSBA assisted us with that because we had an alphanumeric system, and we were able to put all of our policies now to align with the numeric numbers of TSBA. So it's great, honestly, that we've done that, because it makes it much easier if you want to go to other districts and compare policy to policy, the policy numbers line up, where before it was trying to guess, is this the same policy? So that's kind of what I've done, is gone and compared those. And where we have, I think, all of ours kind of in one policy, they have 5.801 is specifically about recruitment and selection, and how that happens. They have some additional information in there. For instance, if there was an interim, and who, if there was an interim, then that person couldn't apply, board members can't apply, so forth. And then on 5.802 is where the qualifications are listed. And so in the sample policy, it has a professional educator's license, a master's degree in education with a preference for a doctorate, 3 years of successful experience in school administration, and such other qualifications as the board desires. It also then goes into the duties of the director, which I feel like are more extensive than what we currently have in policy. So I would like for us to consider as a board that we look at adopting these policies with the whatever we decide as far as criteria, just to get us updated at our next meeting, adopt these, and then using these, putting that into the brochure to adopt that. Does that?
Well, what's in those sample policies is not criteria, it's actually the job description of the superintendent. So the
Right.
minimum qualifications are different for every board, but I mentioned that last time. A majority of the boards do require what you just stated, a master's degree in experience in administration. But the criteria is not in the policy.
Correct. But
Yeah.
part of the criteria does put what our qualifications are.
Yeah, the minimum qualifications.
Minimum qualifications.
Yes.
So that's what I mean. I
Yeah.
just feel like looking at our policy, our current policy, it isn't clear. I feel like the TSBA policy clarifies a lot of things, and I think that some of it is outdated as well, because we have on there as far as like having to have, I think, multiple meetings and different timelines, and I feel like state law clarifies that for us. So those are being printed, and they will be handed out so that board members can look and see what that is.
We may have to check on that too, because I think it has to go through a study session. It wasn't on the agenda, so we'll have to check and see how we can, I don't know if we can do it by next week or not. But we can walk and chew chewing at the same time.
Well, that's what I feel like, because we're talking right now, because we're going to have to set what our minimum qualifications are for the director. So if we're changing what's in policy, I feel like it's prudent to, if we're going to change what those qualifications, if right now all we have is that it has to be a bachelor's degree, if we're going to add to that or change it so that what we put forward then also aligns with board policy, we need to kind of do those at the same time.
I may be wrong, but I think your current policy states a bachelor's degree, and the board can choose to add, I forget the exact language, additional requirements. I believe that's how it's stated currently. Is that correct? Yeah. So with that policy, you could go ahead and, if at your next board meeting, if you want to add to your minimum qualifications, but I don't know what your policy is on adopting new policies. So.
Yeah, I think that in order to change that policy, Ms. Andrews, it's got to run through a study session. But the policy that we do have now, like everybody just said, says that we can add to or take away or whatever we want to do to it. So we have the ability to do that. So I would say we move forward with what we're doing, and then add that to the study session for next month, and get them all in line. I don't know how else to do it, really, because it's before we can change the policy, it's got to go before the study session.
Okay, let me think on that. I just feel like to change policy after the fact seems like we're getting the cart before the horse.
And I'm following you, but the policy we have now states that we can do what we're doing, that we can add to it. So will that hold you for a while?
I'll chew on it.
Okay. Mr. King, I'm sorry.
I just want to point out, any policy change according to our policies requires a second reading. Unless you consider it a matter of, and I'm quoting our policy here, matter of unusual urgency. So I don't know how we could determine that, if it's something that if we want to look at a policy change, maybe call a special meeting, and then if it is considered a matter of unusual urgency, if this is something we need for this director search, then we can waive the second reading, is my understanding. So I just wanted to put that out there. So.
Anybody else? Mr. Daniels.
Yeah, just to clarify, after that conversation, the presentation, I did go back and I reviewed some of the steps we took when we hired our last director, and this kind of aligns with that process, in that we defined the search criteria, we defined the minimum requirements, we used the recruitment firm at that time to go out and recruit. Obviously, we provided them names if we had names, and then we took the next steps in the process. So this aligns with what we've done previously. I guess my question is just for clarification, and for what TSBA needs is, we need to determine if there are any changes we make to the selection criteria and any changes to the minimum qualifications. And we'll approve that at the meeting on the 17th, which is next Tuesday. And then that information will be provided to TSBA. They'll put the formal brochure together, send that out along with contacting those names that they've already provided. And then they'll start going through that process as we get the applications in. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Once the deadline, once we hit the deadline for applicant submissions, what are the next steps in the process? I know you will, in your team, will screen the applicants, and then you will bring back to us suggestions. Is it 10 names? Is it 8 names? Is it is there a number, or is it the ones, here's a group that we think is the best for you to consider? We narrow it down from there, and then we get more into the final candidate interview process. Is that correct?
We can do it whatever way the board wants, but typically when we're doing the search, the board will ask us, as you just stated, we'll screen all the applications and find the candidates that best meet your criteria. And it's usually, the last few searches we've done, people have asked for us to bring back 3 for you to interview. But as I mentioned at the last meeting, we will provide you with all the application files. They're yours, but that's typically why you hire a search firm, is to do the legwork, go through all that. And I think 3 is a good number.
Okay. Yeah, I want to say that in the last search that they brought back 10 names. We reviewed the package that they provided, and then we voted and narrowed it down to 5. And then we interviewed those 5, and from those 5, we went and voted on the candidate that was our first choice, and we brought them back for final interview. Not saying that that's the process we're going to follow this time, because this board may have some other suggestions on how to do that. But I would assume that as we're going through this process, we need to kind of decide as a board what our recommendation on that is as well.
Yes, you definitely need to decide that before you post. It's not good to post it and then change your process 2 or 3 times. By your next board meeting, you need to determine exactly the process, the timeline, and I do know timelines have to be adjusted, and then adopt the brochure.
Are there any other things that we're missing that we need to adopt? I just wanted to try to make sure in my head it was clear what those next steps are and the things that we need to be discussing tonight or as we move into the meeting next week to make final decisions on.
No, you did an excellent job. And the only thing I would need as your search consultant is typically provided a salary range. And if you can get that to me, because people want to know. what the salary range is. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Gregory?
Excuse me. Do we need to do that tonight or just get it to you, the salary range?
You can get it to me after you meet next week.
Okay.
It'll be good.
And I agree, we need to change our policy. As Ms. Andrews said, our county is too large with over 30,000 students. And we need a professional person with a PhD degree in education. If you hire a banker, you get somebody with a degree in banking. If you hire an engineer, you get an engineer degree. If you hire an auctioneer, you
Call
get
me.
I'm waiting for that.
you get somebody with experience, with the knowledge that we need in Sumner County to be able to have visionary avenues of education.
And whatever you decide, I think you should say doctorate degree because you can have a EDD or a PhD. So,
I'd prefer the doctrinal.
well, yeah, there's two types of doctorate, the PhD or an EDD.
Right.
So if you say doctorate, that'll cover both.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. You done? Okay. Mr. Daniels?
Yeah, I was just going to say the one suggestion that I'd have on the minimum qualifications would be a doctorate. I just think on a county our size, a budget our size, we need somebody that's completed that level of education. But I guess the last question I have, since I didn't see any other lights and I want to jump back in here, looking at the selection criteria that we've got listed here, I know that came from feedback from the surveys that we put out. Based on your experience, is there any criteria not listed here that you typically see or you would suggest that we consider adding?
I think these are very consistent with the searches we do. Most all searches, these tend to be the top items, and every district is looking for the same thing that you're looking for, the best candidate to lead their district. So I think the criteria that you have listed here is what you need.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Dr. Grissom, there were 3 things that you said we needed to do by next week, and I forgot to write them down. Would you give those to us again?
Timeline, the vacancy brochure, and both of those are in your folder. And then if you don't mind giving me a salary range.
All right, timeline. I got timeline. My pen wasn't writing. So,
Timeline, vacancy brochure, and salary range.
so we need to approve the vacancy brochure with any additions or corrections to it next week.
Correct?
And then the third one was
Give me a salary range.
salary range. All right. That,
Probably in here somewhere. I want to write it down so it jumps out at me. I think who come first, Mr. King or Ms. Hammond? Mr. King.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I can go if you want.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, just to add a point of interest to the discussion about whether or not they have a doctorate. On the results that we got, possessing a doctorate ranked last in the online survey. Not that I would want someone with postmasteral doctoral experience. I would, but I just thought that was interesting that was the last thing that was ranked. It was ranked number 20 in our list of 20. So
Hey, Mr. King. Ms. Andrews?
So after chewing on it, I think that, honestly, I think to make this process the best that it can be, I think that we should consider if we need to have a study session for these specific policies, is to maybe call a special called study session prior to our next week's meeting, just before, to have it to do the policy changes, just because, like, looking at the selection in our current policy, how it goes, and so forth. Like I said, it says, that it's got to be at 2 meetings and so forth, and I don't know that that's best practices when you're trying to negotiate and see, we need to be able to make a decision, let that person know, go into negotiations and so forth. I think if we approve criteria and then we put it out there and then the next month we change policy, it doesn't make it clear to the candidate kind of and to general public and so forth what our intention is and the process is going to be. I think it would be better for us to solidify process, what our minimum requirements are, get all of that together. It would then easily move straight into the next, into our regularly scheduled meeting. All of that would just transfer in. And then everybody's on the same page. It's clean. That's my opinion.
Any further discussion?
Something I like for us to consider too would be someone who has been successful, of course, as a teacher and as a principal of preferably a high school. And the reason I say a high school, not to say that elementary and middle is not important, but think of all the things that a high school principal must manage other than what the elementary and the middle. All the different athletic teams, the band, the chorus, the cheerleaders, all of it falls back in the principal's lap if things don't go well. I know he's not, probably not the cheerleader sponsor, but at the same time, if things don't go well, he has to be the one to make the decision. And
Those are the things you all need to decide by your next board meeting and get those added to the minimum qualifications.
Is that all, Mr. Gregory?
I think that's all. Thank you, Mr. Wood.
If we wanted to call a special meeting, would we make a motion tonight?
It's not.
Okay, so how would we bring that to pass if we wanted to?
I'm going to discuss
would
it.
we reach out to?
I'm going to discuss it with Mr. Johnson, and the way we
Okay.
normally do that is he'll reach out to the board members and see if a day and a time, if that can be done, and we have to put it together that way.
Okay.
So.
Anybody else?
Well, that be the case. You are dismissed. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to take about a 5-minute recess. All right, let's call the meeting back to order. Next item on the agenda is discussion naming Union Elementary STEM and Demonstration School Library after Will Duncan. Mr. Daniels.
There's no relying on that yet.
You're not there yet?
Yeah, no, that's next week, yeah. I just wanted to take a second to share this from Ms. Taylor, the principal at Union. Just, so the board was aware of the reasonings behind this suggestion. He wrote, Will Duncan's career and contributions to Sumner County stretch beyond his 26 years as a school board member. Mr. Duncan served as the only African-American school board member from 1988 to 2014, giving the African-American community in Gallatin and the entire county representation that they trusted. Mr. Duncan oversaw many positive changes to the school system as board chairman, including the transformation of Union year-round to Union STEM in 2008. As a board member, Union changed from the regular 4th and 5th elementary school to a year-round school and then to a STEM school. In his tenure as a board member, he worked positively with 6 different directors of schools, focusing on what was best for the children of Sumner County. I'm certain, but I do not recall anyone else serving our district for as many years in the capacity of school board member as Mr. Duncan. Union began as a segregated elementary school in 1959 and was not fully integrated until 1970. Along with the naming of our campus after another great African American, Mr. B.J. Hall, the first principal at Union, I feel strongly that naming our library after another great African American who served our school system for so many years and with such great dedication to thousands of children, including those at Union, would be a great way to recognize Mr. Duncan. Union has dedicated our campus to its first principal, Mr. Hall, and dedicated our Ag STEM area to a man who no one can argue has done as much for Union as anyone in Union's 64 years, Mr. David Collins. I feel that the time is right to recognize Mr. Duncan for his contributions to Sumner County, and I'm honored that my school's library can be the location to recognize Mr. Duncan for his contributions to all Sumner County schools. Mr. Duncan may have never taught at Union or served as an administrator, but his impact on and dedication to our school and other Sumner County schools as a school board member should be honored. It is a small but profound way to show respect to a great man who devoted so many years to serving our entire school system. So I just wanted to share that. Those are the thoughts from the principal at Union. I did have the opportunity to serve with Mr. Duncan for a number of years, and I, as a student, actually attended Union, and I have had kids at Union for what seems like 20 plus years, since about the time it opened as a year-round school until next May, when my last child will leave. So I think that the recognition of the library for Mr. Duncan is very deserving at that school. So I just wanted to share that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. Ms. Brown?
I want to move that we name the Union Library.
There's no, we're
Huh?
We'll vote on it next.
No vote?
We vote on it next week.
Well, I'll tell you something you probably don't know. Will Duncan is the one that called me and asked me to run for the school board position, which really shocked me, and because he wanted to devote more time to his church. But I thought that was very odd for his seat to go to me, of all people. Of course, I knew him real well. I've known his family for a long time. So there's no vote. We just,
Next week.
no movement.
We'll
Next
vote on it on Tuesday at our voting session.
Next
Oh,
week.
oh, that's right. It's not a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm asleep.
Mr. Will Duncan, sitting in that chair right there. And I first came on the board, and he showed me how to do it. He showed me what a real gentleman is. Mr. Duncan was always level-headed. Seemed to always have the right answers. And I tended to try to pattern myself after his behavior while serving on his board. But the only thing that I couldn't do, Mr. Will Duncan was a very, very sharp dresser. You knew he was here by, he just stood out. I said to him one time, Mr. Duncan, I've been trying to find some clothes like you have. He said simply, you're not shopping at the right place. I totally, fully, and excitedly encourage us to approve this on our voting session next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Anyone else? All right, next item on the agenda is discussion of high school curriculum guide. Mr. Langford?
Yes, thank y'all. You have the curriculum guide before you, just a little bit of an overview. You can see the names of everyone that participated. We try to get a broad cross-section of principals, assistant principals, guidance counselors. This document, just to give you a little background of what its purpose is it is a go-to document for scheduling assistant principals and guidance counselors. We have kids, you have kids that roll into our high schools from 8th grade into 9th grade, and it lays out, it's where you get all the rules and suggestions, best practices for how they're scheduled into classes and what they need to graduate and how you determine valedictorian and different things like that. It's equally valuable when, we increasingly each year have a large number of kids that move in from other districts or other states. And our counselors have to look, or APs, principals have to look and determine what to give credit for, how to give credit. It includes things like how you score honors classes, dual enrollment classes, AP classes. And it's sort of like a pulling together. These items come from a bunch of different sources. Sometimes it's from state law. A lot of times it's from state board policy. And so one of the things that's hard at the school level to know all the changes from state board. If you look at state board documents, they don't highlight the changes that they make. They just make the changes. So you have to, we have to go through and check. They change course codes. So that's kind of the purpose of this document, is to have one place that our counselors, scheduling APs, principals can go when there's a question about our academic program. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to clarify as you're going through this introduction, because we have a couple of new board members, this is something that we approve every year.
That's right.
It's not something that's just presented this year or updated occasionally. This is a document that's updated every year, and I believe the intent of this presentation is to highlight the changes and give us the opportunity to ask questions related to what is contained within.
That's correct.
All
Yeah.
right, thank you.
Yeah. And that's probably, Mr. Andrews, that's probably the best way to look at it. I just want to give a little bit of background information, but thank you, because yes, we do this every year because the state board meets at least 4 times a year, sometimes more, and they sometimes even after school starts, they will change course codes and things like that. So let me run through. It's probably the best way. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me or ask at the end. So some things is like updating the uniform grading policy. As you know, last year when we passed the curriculum guide last year, we had the grading scale that we had used. I mean, I don't know when they put the 93 to 100 for an A grading scale in, but I know we had that when I was in high school. So it's been a while. So they changed that by state law. So that was not in we changed board policy, but this is caught now in our curriculum guide. So there's language in there for credit recovery classes and things like that, where it makes it align with our current board policy, which is to hit all the grades, 60 to 69, 70 to 79 on up. Let's see, also the way that it always captures, just in case if you take an honors class in Sumner County Schools, you get 3 points added to your final grade. If you take a dual enrollment, you have 4 points added. If you take an AP class, you have 5 points added. We don't do some schools we'll get a lot of questions sometimes for kids that are at JP2 or some other districts. They do a weighted GPA where they'll give you, if you take an honors class, it's on a 5-point scale instead of a 4-point scale. Or if you take an AP class, it's on a 6-point scale instead of a 4-point scale. Most colleges now pull those apart and move them back down to a 4-point scale. Honestly, most colleges today, when they're making admissions decisions, look primarily at testing, ACT or SAT. But anyway, what we do is, regardless of how a college or university looks at the grading scale, we add those points to the students' grades. So regardless of what scale you put it on, our kids have been rewarded for the work that they do. And that's state board policy to add 3, 4, or 5 points to the final grade. We have some, with math standards changing, there's a couple of new things. Forever, we've had bridge and applied math. The state has pulled those off as potential courses, and they're replacing them with a statistics class and then math reasoning. They're also adding AP pre-calc. Yeah.
Can you tell me what the, what is it called, the reasoning?
What's that?
What is math reasoning for decision making? What?
Math reasoning is supposed to be, so the idea is originally before when we had Bridge and Applied. Okay, so every high school student has to take 4 years of math. With math, you have to attempt a math class each year. You have to have 4 credits to graduate, but you also have to have 1 each year of high school. Okay, so when you get past Algebra 2, you begin to see a little bit more of a tracking. Like if you're going to go to college, most of our kids will take some form of pre-calc, calc, statistics, computer science. All those count as a 4th math. Students that are going to go on a different career track will oftentimes take applied math is for kids that are over, I think, a 21 on the 21 or 22 on the ACT. Bridge math, the point of bridge math was for kids to take it that needed to move above a certain score to not have to take remedial classes in college. We've also added, over the last couple of years, one of the community colleges in Chattanooga created a program called Sales Math, which is an online curriculum, and if you complete it, then you don't have to take remedial math classes regardless of your ACT score. So we have for if you're not taking that, stats, pre-calc, calc, that track, we have these other courses. The state, there's always a lot of, where's the proper place for a kid that's not in one of those classes? Is it applied? Is it bridge? Is it sales? And so I think the intent is to higher ed, when Tennessee was redoing their standards at state level, higher ed pushed really hard to have statistics and more conversation about logistics pushed down lower to prepare kids for the kind of careers that we're seeing kids move into now. So a big push to add more probability and statistics into the curriculum. I think that's why you see that statistics class added. And then math reasoning is to try to catch that applied, bridge, finite. It's been called a lot of different things over the last 10 years. But math reasoning kind of catches that. It's to be more of an applied math.
Okay. And since we are in the process, we're fixing to adopt new math textbooks, these new courses are also included within that adoption?
They are, but the odds of there being like a math reasoning textbook.
Like AP pre-calculus.
Yeah.
That is part of it. Like, and is there a staff?
There will probably, Ms. Sanders, there will probably not be an AP pre-calc book because that's a brand new AP course and the publishers won't have time to respond to it. Probably what we'll be doing there is working with some of our high performing math teachers and ask what they use, and we'll look at those materials for that in terms of a textbook. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then going back with Ms. Andrews, AP Pre-Calc is a brand new course. College Board AP is just offering it this year, so we will be able to. High schools are currently working on what their offerings will be, so I'll be able probably in another month to give you an update on which schools are going to offer AP Pre-Calc. And then that leads into, we've had AP Calc, Calc AB and Calc BC for a while. That's a big jump. It's nice to have another AP offering to jump in there to lead into those. So that's AP Pre-Calc. We're waiting. We do not have the course codes from the state. The state board will meet at some point this year and they'll give us the course codes, and we'll go back and update the curriculum guide whenever that happens. So the rest of it is really for principals and assistant principals. We gave them some clear guidelines on how you handle repeated failed courses. I can say, like when I became a principal in 2014, you tended to have, if a kid failed, or when I taught high school, we would sometimes have kids that had failed a class 3, 4, 5 times. They would just keep retaking the class. There are a lot of problems with that. It holds kids back from being able to be in career technical programs, fine arts, athletics, different things like that. So now what you'll see a lot of schools doing is using Edgenuity for credit recovery, or sometimes for initial offerings to get kids caught up. Because what we don't want to do is have kids fall behind, because when you have a kid repeating a class, we really need to look to see what kind of interventions we can get to lift them up instead of just having them kind of repeat a class over and over. And so there's some guidelines in there for principals on how to process that. Other than that, there was an odd thing. Last year we took Move On When Ready. Move On When Ready is a program that allows a kid to finish school a year early. they have to start from the time very early in their high school career to be able to qualify for Move On When Ready to finish after their junior year. Last year it came out because there was an odd state board rule that said if your district is between, say, this size and 30,000 students, or 29,000 students and this size and 31,000 students, then you can't do Move On When Ready. So we weren't eligible to do Move On When Ready. That has now been removed, and we can now do Move On When Ready. So we have added that back into the curriculum guide. We have a number of students that take advantage of early graduation. We do not have very many. We've just had a handful over the last few years that have taken advantage of Move On When Ready, and usually that's due to a move or something like that, or sometimes you just have kids that are really focused on a career path and they want to get started a year early. Beyond that, there are some changes in there for the Tennessee Seal of Biliteracy. It's a seal that our students can get if they reach a certain level of fluency in a foreign language, and it's just an extra way to honor our students for what they achieve in school. But those are the main changes. It's really we don't have as many changes this year as we have in some previous years. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes. So aside from the calendar, this is probably my second favorite thing that we do every year, because I geek out over high school schedules. And so I always love getting information and so forth. So I have I'd make a list of some things I saw. Personal finance online. I feel like that is something. So what we do, or what it's state policy, is that, and I have found by talking to other people who have seniors, that each school may do this differently a little bit of which grade they recommend it. At Beach, they typically their junior year will take a half a credit of PE and a half credit of personal finance. However, we have a lot of student athletes or band or different things that fulfill the qualification for the PE, and then they have a half credit, the personal finance, that they have to take. So it can mess up their schedule. Right. Trying to figure, it essentially takes out a full block because they, TA or do something for that other half. Can they take personal finance online to free up that block so that then they could then take, either another AP course or another, regular?
Yeah, there are two classes that there's no perfect way to schedule. There's strengths and weaknesses to every approach to scheduling. We have 32 credit offerings for a high school student, 8 classes per year. That's a lot. You only have to have 26 to graduate. So the benefit of that is our kids can sometimes do the equivalent of 2 focus elective sequences. They can do multiple career technical education pathways. They can easily do, it's really been wonderful for fine arts, we have policy for fourth block athletics. It's supported a lot of kind of whole student beyond just math, English, science, and social studies. It's created room for kids to get involved in a lot of things in the school, especially those career technical programs. If you drop off the 32 credits, it's really hard to get all those things in. So we have that going, but even with those 32, when you have students that do something that take 2 semesters a year, so if you're in band, if you're in chorus, if you're in theater, if you if you play sport, there are a number AP. There are a number of different things. There are 2 classes that tend to jam schedules: wellness for freshmen and personal finance. Most schools are doing it junior year. So districts do it differently. Some let you do an initial credit offering with those courses. We can certainly look into doing that. The question becomes is as you move if you think of scheduling at a high school, it's like when you're that game where you move all the cars around the garage to get one out. Whenever you move a car here, there's an equal and opposite move somewhere else. So when you free kids up by not taking that class during the regular year, you have to have a place for them in the schedule. So high schools are trying to figure out how you best manage that. I do think like anything that we can do to remove obstacles from students taking more challenging courses. Let me look into that and see kind of where we felt.
I think specifically for athletes that want to take specifically AP courses, sometimes their schedules are hard because they have to take fourth block athletics, and then like I said, that takes a place where they're already getting the credit for PE. So yes, if we could look at that,
Sure.
and make that
Yeah. go-
aware that that's an opportunity, and even for kids who aren't maybe athletes, there was a number of things that you could be involved in that would satisfy the PE requirement. But even just looking at, giving
Yeah.
more kids the opportunity to put those,
Yeah.
because I do know that makes that difficult sometimes.
Yeah, government econ is another one. There are 3 classes
Yes.
that really jam.
And that happens too, because if you take marketing classes, then you don't have to take econ, but you still have to take the government
Right.
aspect.
Right.
So I think, sometimes looking at the overall schedule and figuring
Well,
out how
and
we
it's
piece that together.
It's one of those things because different schools do it differently. Some schools do a full semester of personal finance because of that scenario where you just laid
Okay.
out. So many kids now, if you're in band and you march or you play a sport, you get that half credit of PE, and you don't have to take that class for 9 weeks. So that frees up a lot of kids. So a lot of schools have gone because they think like the personal finance curriculum is really good, and it's one of those things that all kids really need. But I'll say this: the Edgenuity course for personal finance is pretty rigorous. It's a good course. So they'll still learn. It doesn't replace, like, no online class will completely replace a face-to-face class, but it is something for those.
Just know that there's an option
It's just
out
another
there.
tool for a counselor's
Yes.
arsenal to get kids to be able to take more. And also, like when I can say where we've reached now, like the first year I was principal, we had 8-9 valedictorians because they were capped at how many honors AP dual enrollment classes we could, that you could take. That's really off the board. I mean, we have some kids with 27, 28 honors dual enrollment AP classes when they graduate. So but always anything we can do to free up more opportunities for our kids to pursue what they want to do, we want to absolutely look into that.
So another question is about dual credit. I actually had this question recently asked of me. So it's my understanding that with AP, that students will get the 5 value points as long as they take the test. If they choose not to take the test, then they forfeit the value points. Is that correct?
They get 3
They get
for like
3,
an
okay.
honors class.
So is that the same thing with the dual credit, that they have to take the test that aligns with that as well to get the full 4 points?
Dual credit's a little different because it's not offered. It's usually not in an honors type scenario.
Okay.
So it's kind of like you take a dual. So there's there's AP. There is dual enrollment, which is a class with a partner like Vol State or MTSU. There is dual credit, which is you complete a course, or you can just take them. You don't have to complete the course. But like let's say a lot of our kids take them they take one of the courses on where you learn how to make spreadsheets, or it's almost like an industry certification, and you can take that dual credit test and then you can pay $25 and that's on your transcript, so you'll get credit for it. So there are a number of, we run into more of a problem of universities not wanting to partner to offer. You have to do that through a sponsor university or community college. We've tried, Chase Moore works with us a lot, with Vol State, with Nashville Tech, with others, to be able to get our kids dual credit offerings. So we're not really adding points on a dual credit because they're getting the credit for it. And it's not, we have to show when we apply for a special course, or if you look at our curriculum guide for honors, you have to show that there's something beyond just a test to add those rigor points on there.
So on the thing that it says that they get the 4 percentage points.
I may be looking at the wrong
Dual
thing.
credit. So
What page?
it's on page 17.
I may be looking at the wrong thing, Ms. Andrews.
And I do get sometimes confused on dual credit and dual enrollment.
Yeah.
I think they could pick a different. Dual enrollment as well gets the 4 percentage points.
Dual enrollment absolutely gets the 4 points. That's with a college class with an adjunct faculty member from the university.
But I was specifically asked about the dual credit recently, if they get it regardless or only if they take, I guess, the test.
Yeah, let me get an answer on that, Ms. Andrews,
Okay.
because the only reason that we don't do a dual credit class per se, we do honors, AP, and then dual enrollment. We take some dual credit tests, but I don't know of a dual credit class. So let me check on
Okay.
that.
And then couple of updates that I noticed that we need to make, just clerical. On page 18, we're still referencing policy IHAA from our old, when we had the Alpha system. I believe that should be 4.600.
Okay.
So, and then on page 21, it has IFCA. I think that's going to be policy 6.501.
Gotcha. Yeah, we can clean that up.
If you'll just double check that one, I don't know for certain. That's the foreign exchange policy, or foreign exchange student policy. I
Yeah.
think that's probably what that aligns with. And then on page 28, if we could include on there the link to TSSAA athletic eligibility requirements, I feel like TSSAA can be very confusing, and so to just put that on there, if we can have the link, then that way if somebody's like, well, what are those? It's easily accessible, and you don't have to go dig, because it's not,
Sure.
their website's not easy to navigate.
No, it is not.
So if we could add that, I think that concludes my list.
And I'll follow up on the dual credit. Yeah. I know the way that we do dual credit is usually the student's just taking the test at the end of a class. But I'll find out about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Anybody else? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Ms.
you.
Langford. Next item on the agenda is discussion of policy 4.403, reconsideration of instruction materials and textbooks. I believe that's Mr. President.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The matter before you now is pertains to amending and restating policy number, section 4.403, reconsideration of instruction materials and textbooks. The proposal is to revise this policy to become in line with the Age Appropriate Materials Act that the Tennessee legislature passed in March of 2022, which requires certain things for local school districts to do. I want to go over some of those requirements, and then we can walk through the policy. Obviously, I'm happy to take questions. The requirements are, first of all, that each school maintain a list of its library materials, and to also publish that list on the school's website. My understanding is those two things are already done, of course, would be continued to do. That's not a matter of this policy, but it is part of the law, so I wanted to advise you of that. The policy that this legislature and this statute requires us to adopt is really twofold. One is a procedure for the development of library collections at the school level, including a periodic review of those library materials. The second part is to have a policy for receiving feedback from either a current student, employee, parent, or guardian pertaining to a book in the library, or more broadly speaking, a library material. Could be videos or anything of that nature, anything in the library collection. Not only to receive that feedback, to evaluate any complaint regarding a library material, and then make a decision about whether it should or should not remain in the library, and if so, where, in terms of its accessibility to certain age groups. Interestingly enough, after going through all these policy requirements and giving us some guidance, the statute then in the last section says, but school districts could also, this is not the exclusive means to accomplish a review of library materials, and the school districts are free to come up with its own policy on how to do this. So it gives us some instruction, but also some discretion as well. The TSBA has produced a template of a new 4.403 policy to comply with this statute. Several school districts that I've been through my research that I have reviewed have adopted some version of this, and some adopt it without much change at all. Some adopt it with minor changes. Some adopt it with more than minor changes. So I took a look at all of those, and I have drafted a sample policy for your review and discussion and for your decision. And I'd like to walk through that with you. Of course, discuss as you wish, and make suggested changes as you wish. This is a proposal. So when I walk through this, I'll try to point out sort of where we're following the TSBA policy and the template fairly much verbatim, and then sort of where we're not. And noting too that the template calls for each local school district to insert its own sort of local standards. So we begin with the opening sentence, which is essentially taken from our current policy that just states that in review of our library materials that we recognize the rights of sort of embedded in the First Amendment. And then we define library materials, and that's taken from the Age Appropriate Materials Act of 2022. Verbatim. I will note that this policy pertains only to library materials and not materials as part of a curriculum. Okay, so I want to make sure that distinction is there. The third section, beginning for each school, this is where the discretion comes in, and this board can decide. Remember, I said that the first thing that the statute wanted school districts to do was establish a review committee, if you will, a committee, a group, an employee, whomever this board selects, to develop a review criteria to review all the library material collections, not only to develop those collections, but also to review them periodically. And so what we have proposed here is that each school establish a library materials committee that will be appointed. We put 5 members, it's good to have an odd number, appointed by that school's principal, to include a principal. That school's principal could be a vice principal, 2 teachers, a librarian, and a parent from that school. And then continuing on down, when this committee reviews all those materials in the library, it has to do so with these 4 criteria, 1 through 4, and those are taken from the TSBA policy. I think the only word change there is in paragraph 2. At the end, in the parenthetical, instead of vulgar language, I put pervasively vulgar language, which I believe slightly more accurate in terms of First Amendment concerns. Otherwise, those are the same 4 in the TBS template. Continuing on, and of course, interrupt me anytime, but continuing on, remember that the Act requires this committee to also review periodically. As you can see on line 24, we put in there that this committee must review the library materials annually. And then line 26, while this is not a requirement of the statute to be in the policy, we thought it was good practice to put it in the policy that those maintaining, the school must maintain a list of the library materials and also publish it on their website. So practically speaking, we have a set of library materials now in 2022, 2023. If each school's committee does a new review or brings in new materials for the 23-24 school year, that list would be updated not only physically in the library but also online. Okay. That then concludes that first section about a committee or a group to review the collections as the statute requires. We then move into the complaint, sort of what we call the complaint section. This is what I mentioned in terms of a policy requiring a procedure for receiving feedback from an employee, student, parent, guardian, and then evaluating that feedback over whether a material should remain in the library. So I begin with the paragraph there. We're now on line 1 of page 2. Because opinions differ, we took that language from our current policy, current 4.403, and then we add in the language that the statute says that a current employee, parent, guardian, or student may make a complaint about a library material. And then we walk through the steps that the complainant would go through and that the review committee would go through. And that is taken pretty much directly from the TSBA policy. There's I made some slight changes in terms of some really more stylistic, others not so. But the principal then receives this complaint. Let's just say it's from a parent, by way of example. Inform the parent that we have these procedures, and not to make any commitment one way or the other about what the outcome will be. Request that this parent submit a formal request for reconsideration, which we have in place, and then the principal must inform school personnel and the director of schools. The materials will remain in the library pending the review process. And where we've changed slightly is paragraph 5 of the template. In the template, it requires notification of the director of schools, and we already had that in paragraph 3. So we go right into an ad hoc committee that the principal will set up, which is really in paragraph 6 of the template, but we set it forth in paragraphs 5 and 6 here. So let's walk through what that process is. So a complaint is received at the school level. The principal will create what we're calling sort of an ad hoc school level review committee. Has 30 school days to accomplish that. This committee shall be comprised of 5 members at the principal's discretion, but it must include at least 1 librarian, 1 teacher, and 1 parent. Then you see in paragraph 6, this goes through what this school level review committee will do, and that is taken, I think almost verbatim from the TSBA template. So they will read, review, listen to, as the case may be, the challenge material. They will do some research about it, as you can see in section B. They will make a determination about this material's age appropriateness for the students who have access to it. Then I think, as they currently do, they will complete the appropriate checklist for reconsideration and present a recommendation to the school's principal about whether the material should or should not remain in the library. We move over to the last page of the draft policy. In paragraph 7, the principal then provides the complainant, in our example, a parent, with a recommendation and indicates whether the committee accepted or denied the recommendation. Then the question becomes, what happens after that? Which means we move to paragraph 8. If the complainant desires further action, meaning he or she does not agree with the ad hoc school level review committee's decision, then that person has 10 days to appeal that decision to this board, directly to this board, 10 school days. If there is no appeal, and this is where we sort of modify the TSBA policy somewhat. If there is no appeal, then the decision of that school level committee will become the decision of the board. If the complainant appeals that decision of the school level committee, then it will come to the board for further evaluation and review and a final decision. The thought there being, the statute requires that the board make the evaluation and determination, but it gives the board discretion to create policies on how to accomplish that. And so in looking at some of the other school districts who've adopted this policy, some have just said every book goes to the board without any intermediate level decision making, if you will. Others have said that it never goes to the board unless there's some type of appeal. I thought the better practice here was to ensure that we're complying with the statute, meaning the committee's decision becomes the board's decision if the complainant, the parent, does not further appeal. But if there is an appeal, then this board makes an independent and sort of secondary decision. And that's what I've set forth in paragraph 8. Paragraph 9 then is the conclusion, and it, for the most part, tracks the TSBA template, meaning that if the ultimate decision is that the material is not age appropriate, the statute says remove the book from the library. I modified that slightly to say the book shall become inaccessible to those for whom it is inappropriate because of their age. Considering this concept of, let's take a grade 1 through 4, 1 through 5, theoretically there could be books that are not age appropriate for a first grader or kindergartner, but would be appropriate for a fourth grader or fifth grader. The concept being, if it is determined to be age inappropriate, to remove the book from being accessible to the first graders and kindergartners, leaving it accessible to the remainder, as opposed to just straight out removing from the entire library. That is the draft. As I said, it's a proposal taken from the statute, trying to think about practicalities of how this will actually work, looking at other school districts' policies and how they've handled it. So happy to take questions.
Mr. Daniels.
I've got a couple questions. Number one, from a process review standpoint for this policy, is there a timeline or an expedited timeline in which we need to approve this? The reason I'm asking is typically with our policies, it comes to a study session, then it goes to a voting session for first reading, then it comes back to a study session, and then we approve it on second reading, unless we waive first reading. Is there any anticipation that we would waive first reading, or do we anticipate this following the entire process? Because there's a lot to unpack in this policy, and I just want to make sure that we've got time to review it, and I'm sure we'll get feedback from individuals in the community. The first time seeing this tonight, I've got some questions, but there may be things that I'm not thinking about right now that others, some of our librarians, I believe we have a couple that are here, they may have more specific questions.
Mr. Daniels, I believe it needs to be adopted before the end of this current school year.
So
it needs to be adopted within the 2022-23 school year.
I think too many lights on, but I would say, I think that's what's in the statute, and I agree with you that you won't have time to discuss it. Our voting session is only a week away. You really wouldn't want to waive second, so it would be back on next month's study session. So it gives you plenty of time to look at it, get feedback, ask questions before you actually vote the policy in. So I think we still have plenty of time to look at it, have it on another study session. You could have it on even more than one if you needed to, if it took that long.
Okay, thank you. The next question I had is, this policy is based on age appropriate, the law that was passed by our state. It does not supplement or override the obscene materials policy that we still have in place. So in cases where there may be some materials that we view, that we determine we don't want in our school system, that policy can be used to quickly remove those, because I know in this policy it says the materials will remain in circulation while that review process is conducted. I just want to make sure that that is correct as well.
Yes, it is. It is.
Then the last couple questions I have is and this just goes to my understanding, if a book is challenged at Benny Bill's, and it's in circulation, and that staff comes together, that committee comes together and says, you know what, we believe that this book may be inappropriate for first, second graders, but we think it's appropriate for third graders. But this book is in multiple libraries at other schools. Will that decision impact where that book is housed in other schools as well, or will it just relate to that one school where the book was challenged?
Just relates to that one school.
Okay. And then the next question I had, and this is kind of the last one, is I know at the end where we get into the board review, if there's an appeal, do we need to have some type of timeline as far as the board's review or how quickly we need to take up that appeal. The reason I'm asking is, if we have a book, a picture book, very smaller book, or maybe it's a book for first and second graders, and we're looking to move it to third or fourth graders, whatever that is, that's probably a quick read. If someone decides, I don't think Lord of the Rings should be available to 10th graders, and they bring that and someone were to appeal that decision, I would assume that as a board, you would want us to read that book so that we would understand the content. That's not something that we could probably read. And I know that that's more of an exaggerated example, but as you get into books for our higher grade levels, they are longer books, chapter books. Do we need to set some type of expectation from a turnaround time to make sure that we're responding appropriately to the appeal of the individual, but also allow us as a board the time to get through the material that's being asked for us to review?
Right, the statute does not put a time limit on it, so this board is free to insert a time frame.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Mr. Daniels. Ms. Andrews.
Thank you. So, one, I want to piggyback off of Mr. Daniels. I will say this, that I have been following the textbook commission and their process as far as kind of making some more guidelines for this policy. I did reach out to Dr. Cash this week, actually the end of last week, because she is the chairman of that commission, to see about getting that policy. It's currently in draft form, so they're still working through it. But I do know through the conversations that they've had that they are possibly looking at putting some timelines in there, and some other stipulations and so forth. So it may be something that we end up having to address again later on once they finalize what all of that looks like. My questions is, so on the first page under library selection, we have a library materials committee that's of 5 people. Then under the complaints, we have an ad hoc. Would those not be the same committee, or would you have separate committees in the school?
I would have separate, because if you have a group of 5 that are selecting library materials, and then something's challenged,
Okay.
they've already made a decision to buy that, so they're already biased to that material.
Okay, I just want to make
That makes sense. You wouldn't 2 years later decide that the book you bought 2 years ago is inappropriate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think you would want to have some separation there.
Do we need to specify that within the policy that they are not the same members of?
Could be. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably.
Just because it says on here at least one librarian, one, a teacher and a parent.
Probably,
Obviously, the librarian is going to be the same, especially like an elementary school where you only have one.
I
But
think everyone but the librarian, we could probably put on there that that's a good point. At least that was my thought, that you would,
because me reading it intentionally before really processing, just would be, well, why wouldn't you just use that? But that makes a good point of, if they're the ones selecting it, it would be hard for them to critique that same. So, so I do think to add that language in there that it would be different. Also, under complaints on number 4, where it says keep challenge library materials available for use during the reconsideration process, I think we should add the language except in the instance when it is those materials are being used for review, because we can't keep. I mean, I think this happened. We can't keep it in process if we need those materials to review.
I think that's a good point. Just if we only have one,
Right.
then it's going to be hard to review that material. If you only have one.
Right. So I think including that language to clarify that would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Ms. Hawkins?
I had a question about the description of mature themes or content. Pervasively vulgar language, is that the same as obscenity?
That's a good question. So under the First Amendment, when courts are reviewing reviewing this, they talk about being able to remove, like, that school districts can remove books when they are pervasively vulgar, not right for the curriculum as that district may determine, or there are significant factual inaccuracies. And so since that language was used, that's why I suggested adding that or adverb in there.
So if a book is under review and it has pervasively vulgar language, it can stay on the shelves while it's under review?
Under this draft policy, yes.
Okay.
If there's more than one copy.
Now, that is not in the statute. That is comes from the template from the TSBA. So this board is free to alter that.
Okay, so if a book is obscene and a librarian sees that it's obscene, that librarian can take that book immediately off the shelf,
Yes.
correct? But pervasively vulgar language does not fall under that same qualification?
No. Obscene is a different definition.
Okay. And then I also was wanting to know, it doesn't make sense to me that a book can be found inappropriate or age inappropriate for one school and then not be communicated school system wide, that if it's not appropriate for the children in this elementary school, shouldn't that be communicated to all elementary schools that this book is not appropriate?
I mean, that's not a function of the law. That would be something this board would decide. So I think Mr. Lancaster, in our very first conversation about this some time ago, mentioned that, if you remember. And we all kind of looked around and I said, I don't know. And I guess it probably would make sense to do that, but it's not part of what the law says. It doesn't have any bearing one way or the other, but the school board would have certainly have the authority, I think, Todd, don't you, to put that into policy.
It just
to
seems
say
like
if
we'd
it's
be
removed-
reinventing the wheel at every school
Right,
instead
if
of
it's
saying, okay,
restricted.
we've processed this book, it's been determined, let's share that information throughout the school system.
Right, I don't think that there's any reason that the board could not add that language and make that part of it. I don't think, Todd, do you? Because
No.
that's, the law is quiet about that.
No prohibition on that. The only thing I would point out is that sometimes it's sort of lost in the age appropriateness language, but the statute also contemplates removing books that does not fit the mission of the school. Now, would one school's mission be different than another at an elementary? I don't know, probably not, but I just wanted to point that out to the board. That language is in there. Perhaps in theory, it could require removal in one school and not another, but nothing, Dr. Phillips is right, nothing prohibits this board from having the communications made to other schools, asking other schools to undertake a similar review.
So I'm understanding you say that some schools' culture background might not find this offensive, whereas another school's culture would find it offensive or inappropriate?
I would not. What I'm trying to separate is that the statute contemplates a review not only for whether a library material is appropriate for a certain age, but whether it, quote, fits the school mission. So it's an or, not an and.
So aren't our schools, don't we all have the same mission statement?
I'm not suggesting you don't. I just wanted this board to understand that is in the statute. But again,
Okay.
Nothing prohibits this board from saying if a book is determined to be inappropriate for certain ages at school A, that a notification can't be made to schools B and C.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hawkins, Mr. Lacy?
What does the Tennessee law refer to on the vulgar language? Well, how does it word it?
It is U.S. Supreme Court language in terms of First Amendment and the ability of school districts to remove books from school.
But how does it word it? Does it call it vulgar language, or does it call it perversively vulgar?
Pervasively vulgar.
What, sir?
Pervasively vulgar
Oh,
language.
that's how it's worded?
Yes.
What's the difference between perversively vulgar or just vulgar language? I was just curious.
I think pervasively would mean it's widespread throughout the publication.
And I know we use the First Amendment that it gives, I guess, the ability to, you can have vulgar language in a book. How does the First Amendment give that? How does that make it okay for kids to read that? Or if a book has vulgar language, how does it make it okay to be in the book, is what I'm asking.
I'm saying the opposite, that a pervasive
I understand, but I'm asking if vulgar language is in a book, but say it's really not really bad, but it's in there, how does the First Amendment make that okay?
That's what the Supreme Court has said, that in determining whether banning books, removing books from school libraries violates the First Amendment, that's one of some examples that the Supreme Court gave to determine when school districts could do that.
And like on the back side, I guess, what is it, the complaints on 4, it says keep challenged library material available for use during reconsideration. I know, like with Lomboy, I believe Dr. Phillips, you pulled that book. Could we put in here maybe if the book is obvious that it's bad, we can pull the book off the shelf? We could use a judgment call?
Yes, nothing in the statute, state statute
Or would that be our obscenity policy that says that we can?
It probably would be, but you could restate it to some degree in here, I guess, if you wanted to add that.
Yes, this is, again, this.
Nothing precludes you from doing that.
Right, this is language not from the statute, but from the TSBA's template, so we're free to modify it.
I mean, I would love to see that where we could have an option as a board. Hey, if this is a pretty bad book, why leave it on the shelf if we know it's obviously bad? Let's get it off.
You certainly put that in.
Got it, thank you.
Ms. Lacy?
Thank you.
Mr. King?
Yeah, just a few questions regarding the law itself. I spoke to counsel from the TSBA and also one of the authors of the law, and they said that the change in the law is that it renders the review committees to only have recommendation authority. In other words, they are not permitted by this law to give any kind of final decision, and the decision, according to the law, has to be taken up by the school board and decided. And I'll just share, it says, item C on the law, a local board of education or public charter school governing body shall evaluate each material for which feedback is provided according to the procedure established pursuant to the previous subsection. So, in other words, they form their committee to give feedback, and then the language here, and it's my understanding that the language shall is a binding, it's not discretionary, but a binding, it has binding authority. In other words, the school board, they have to take up this feedback and evaluate it and make a decision. And so, and when I spoke to one of the authors of the law, I asked him, I said, does this law basically get rid of the appeal process? And he said, yes. And so what the law does is it removes the appeal. And in fact, every complaint that comes up in the review committee is automatically given to the board to evaluate. So I think there might be a mistake here in that. I think that if we're going to have to have an appeal process, I think that is not compliant with the law. The review committee's decision is not final. It does not have standing authority. In fact, it has to be evaluated and voted on by the board. That's one of the major changes that I got in. While Section E does state that that these are not the only exclusive means to remove material, and it does not preclude an LEA from developing or implementing other policies or practices. That was put in there in order to allow librarians and principals to keep removing books without any kind of process, because they have autonomy to do that. and it doesn't mean that we can kind of go rogue and form our own sort of autonomous policy. And I want to share this from TSB counsel. This is because I had a question about that, and this is his response to me. He said, the district still must have a policy compliant with the process outlined in the law. The additional subdivisions allows the district to develop one or more additional processes to address this issue. For example, you all have a policy that already addresses obscene materials and requires immediate removal. Section E allows for that, right? The board could also implement other policies. This does not allow the board to ignore the law because it states that the requirements of the law are not the exclusive way. So to me, they're giving some additional processes, but as far as the meat and the potatoes of the law, it appears that they're removing the appeal. And those review committees only have recommendation authority. They can do a review, they can form a committee, they can provide feedback, they can give their recommendation, but they cannot remove the book and make a decision. And we cannot, as a board or administration, director of schools, whoever, say that decision is final because that committee ruled on it. When I read the language of the law, it says the governing body shall evaluate. In other words, that is a binding language that we have to take it up. Is that accurate in your opinion?
The board can certainly take on that responsibility directly, but Section C, when it's talking about shall evaluate according to the procedure adopted. So this board can adopt a procedure and evaluate it through that process. So to me, the question for this board is, how does it want that process to work?
Well, hold on. It says here, procedure established pursuant to subdivision B2. So it's pointing to the previous subdivision. So what you're saying, it's not giving it as autonomy here, is what you're saying. You're saying that there needs to be, that we can develop a procedure just on our own, and then we shall evaluate it based on that. What I'm saying is the law is actually very clear that it's according to, we're going to evaluate the feedback that was established pursuant to subdivision B2. So I don't think we can ignore that and just make up our own procedure. So that's my concern on that.
I understand, and my opinion, and what I'm telling this board is that it can adopt a policy for reviewing and evaluating complaints, if you will, from students, employees, or parents. It can choose how to do that. It can say what you just said, Mr. King, that a review committee can make a recommendation, and then anytime there is a complaint about a library material, it automatically comes to this board for review. Nothing certainly prohibiting that. But also you can adopt a different kind of policy that accomplishes the same thing by saying, review committee, you can make a recommendation. If the complainant then does not take an appeal from that recommendation, then essentially has abandoned that complaint, then the review committee's decision becomes the board's decision. However, if the challenge remains, then it absolutely comes to this board for full evaluation. So that's the proposal. But again, it's a proposal. I think it's compliant with the law, but there's nothing prohibiting this board from
Well, I'm not
changing
talking
that
about a
direction.
proposal. I'm actually looking at the actual statute. It also states in Section D that the school board shall remove the material from the library collection. Nowhere in the law does it say that this feedback group that's providing feedback can remove any material. And so the language there, again, uses shall remove. In other words, that is a binding mandate on the school board to be the body that makes the final decision. So I'm not getting anything in this law that is saying that we can sort of make up our own policy here. that's totally ignoring all of this. So I'm just following, I'm looking at subsection A, I'm looking at A or section B2, 3, C and D, and it appears that, that all of those are pretty straightforward. Section E allows for additional, maybe, like, for example, a librarian sees a book that's got some obscene material in it, or it's inappropriate, or doesn't feel that that's the right book for her students, they can pull it. Or a principal can pull a book. So E allows for other means like that. I don't think it allows for our board to just ignore the rest of the law. So,
well, respectfully, I don't think this draft policy does that. In fact, your point about removal of materials from the library is captured in paragraph 9, and that's comes from the TSBA policy, and that is the board.
Paragraph 9 of what?
Of the draft policy, and of the TSBA policy.
Okay.
So that if this
But that's
policy
that's after an appeal. I'm just saying that the law does not allow for an appeal. That's all I'm saying. So,
well, it just references the determination at whether it's by the board through that appellate process or by that committee.
I mean, I'm not reading it about it.
Either way, the material would be removed pursuant to this policy, which is the board's edict.
Okay. I'm still not reading an appeal process in the law.
It's the procedure. It's the procedure part. The law says that we have to develop a procedure.
Okay, so.
And that procedure is what I'm talking about in terms of having a first level review, and then it makes its way to this board for the final decision. And the final decision either comes through an appeal from the complainant or the complainant dropping the appeal.
Section C says the board shall evaluate.
Pursuant to the policy developed, yes.
According to the procedure established
Correct, and that's what we're doing. We're establishing that procedure, which is what the policy requires.
Okay.
But I want to be clear. I mean, there's nothing prohibiting this. This is a draft proposal. It allows for the school level committee to do the initial review and make that recommendation. If the person complaining doesn't agree or wants to take it further, then it can bring it to this board for further review.
But this says this says we shall evaluate.
Right.
The same. It says we will evaluate alongside with that recommendation committee. What you're saying is that we're not even going to get it unless they make an appeal. But the law says we have to look at it too.
The law says we shall evaluate pursuant to the procedure that the board sets up. And so this policy that would then implement the board's decision. But again, nothing's prohibiting this body from adopting a policy here that says every complaint about a library material comes even directly to this board without going through an initial review committee process.
All right, so we're saying the appeal is going to be part of the procedure. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. That
okay.
The review, the appeal. It's the review. So we have a complaint. We have a school level committee that reviews it, makes the recommendation. If the complainant disagrees, or let's say she agrees, then the matter's over. If she doesn't, then it comes to this board for further evaluation.
I mean, that's what we have now, right?
The biggest.
In other words, the school board doesn't get to see any of the material that we shall evaluate unless the appeal happens.
The difference is that absent that appeal, the current policy doesn't say anything about this being the board's decision. And so
right.
That's the difference.
But this law says we do have something to. we do have, we will have to evaluate.
Through the procedure you develop, yes.
But the procedure you're saying we're developing is the same procedure we already have. So we won't get to read or review the material unless there's an appeal.
That review committee, under the current, how it's currently drafted, that review committee, if the complainant just doesn't take it forward and agrees with the decision,
Right.
that becomes the decision of the board.
And that's what we're trying to keep.
That's the procedure.
That's the procedure we're trying to keep. Right?
To keep, I'm not understanding that. It's
Well, the
procedure
review
that's-
committee does their review, and if the person doesn't want to appeal it, then it's the decision of the review committee is final.
Correct.
Okay, that's what we have now, and I'm confused as to why we need this law when it says, we shall evaluate the same material. It's not making sense to me, but I'll look into it. I mean, I'm just saying that I've talked to the author of the law, I've got counsel from others, and they're saying it removes the appeal process completely. Any review of any material, the school board now automatically has to review it as well and make the final decision. They take the recommendation from the review committee into their decision making, and they're making that final decision. So, but
Absolutely. In my research, there have been, I know 2, maybe up to 4, if my memory serves, who have just left it as an appeal only. And I felt like in paragraph 8, we needed to add that language that if the complainant doesn't want to continue to challenge the book, then that becomes the determination of the board. For that reason.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. King. Ms. Hawkins?
So, when I spent some time in the libraries a few months ago, there was a new librarian. She had just been assigned to this library, and she was going through all the books and deciding which books to pull. So she had the power to remove a book from the library without talking to anybody. She showed me shelves back in a closet. She said, "These books I'm pulling, I don't think they're good for my students." So I think that goes hand in hand with what we're saying here, is that if a librarian decides that a book that's challenged shouldn't be on the shelf, that's her or his or her power as a librarian. It's my understanding that they don't have to go to the board, they don't have to come to us and say, "I'm taking these books off the shelf." They have some powers to do that. And so if a book is challenged and the librarian says, "Yeah, you're right, I'm going to take this off the shelf," at that point, that is essentially our employee making a decision that we've hired them to do. And so in a way, we do have a say-so with that.
I would just respond to that and say one thing this policy does is establish this library materials committee. So that would now be a committee decision.
I think when you look longer than, right now, you're looking at this being a process that happens every year, over and over and over. And you want to comply with the law, which says you're going to have your library collections online, which we already do. You can go and search by school. And different books at every school, some books that are the same. I think my thought, you have to have a procedure in the policy that helps with the selection of library collection materials over time, each year, right? And so you involve more people than just one. So we had a parent on there, teachers, principal. So you can kind of get a good, we can get some representation on the selection of those materials. Of course, the librarian's going to play a key role in that. And then you make sure that those are, that entire collection, what is new is added to the list, right, as you move forward. So once you capture the list first and you say, here's all of our collection, you have to make sure that that is updated annually. Now, in my mind, how I would do that, every year I would add those to the collection, but I would also publish that list separately, right? So if you were a parent and you wanted to see everything that was selected by that committee for my school for this year, you could see that. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't have to go back and search through everything to see what was new. Does that make sense? I think that's a little bit easier and more accountability that way. For parents, for everyone. And I think that's manageable. I think that can be done.
Mr. Lacy.
You're saying that would be all the new books that were purchased that year, or just those that were reviewed? All of them. All purchased and reviewed books would be on a separate list.
That way you just have a much easier for a parent or anyone to look at, okay, well, I want to see all the things that were added in the library collection for this school year. And they could update that if they added something throughout the year or that kind of thing.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Moving on to the next item. Discussion regarding reconsideration request appeal for library book Ways to Make Sunshine.
We actually had a challenge to a book and Ways to Make Sunshine. We have the book if any of you would like to get a copy to review. And we'll have this on the agenda for the board to make a decision about from the recommendation from the school.
All right. Any discussion on that? We'll see it again next week. All right. Look like the last item, discussion of policy 1.404, appeals to appearances before the board.
Mr. Lacy asked for this to be put on the agenda, so I'll let him speak to it.
I was looking, I noticed in 2016 we changed it. Why did we change that policy then to where I would think it'd be great to where anybody, no matter what you believe, how you stand politically, that if, maybe on a study session, we could have 30 minutes, at the end of the meeting, and anything they wanted to address the board on, they could address us in some shape, form, or fashion. And I know in 2016, the board removed that opportunity for people to.
That's not correct. I've been here since 2011, and it's been like this since then.
Well, I know on here it says the last
updated. What's it say? I'm sorry.
Well, I've got an old copy, but the new one says last revised February 16th, 2016.
Yeah, that means we probably reviewed it in the cycle when we went.
And I have like a really old copy of our old policy, and it's got like a line through an individual desiring to speak about a K through 12 education issue not on the board agenda is allowed. And I'm trying to see if this has a date on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Mr. Lacy. I know the function of the speaking to the board policy, I think it's been the same since I've been here. But we can check and see, go back and look.
So regardless, I know when I went to the TSBA training, I actually spoke with some people from Shelby County and Memphis, and they actually have a policy where they allow people, I think on a study session, they set aside 30 minutes. Each person gets maybe, I think 3 minutes, and they can address their board. Just from dealing with parents and different people in the community, sometimes they would like to come here, be on the record, and just be able to have your attention. And sometimes when they're sending emails to whomever, they don't feel like they're actually being heard. And if they could come and have an opportunity to talk to us, I think it'd be a win-win to be able to address our board. I think I would love for us to have the opportunity to fix that.
Mr. Lacy, Mr. Brown, or Mr. Gregory, I mean?
I think the reason that this is like it is because of recommendation from TSBA and our county. County Commission, I think they have the same ruling, and I'm not sure about all counties now, but I mean, I think that's where it came from.
Mr. Gregory? Mr. Wise? Mr. Wise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Board meetings are not the time or the place to communicate with your constituents. And all citizens of the county, whether in your district or not, are your constituents. The time that you communicate with your constituents is at, for example, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock when your phone rings. And I'm up in Cottontown, and the caller's from Hendersonville. I take it anyway. I listen to them. I talk with them. They ask questions, I make phone calls and find the answers to the best of my ability. Or maybe it's an email at 9 o'clock on Monday night in the third quarter of Monday Night Football game. And at the next commercial, I might just respond to that email, but it will be at the next commercial. That's when you communicate with your constituents. That's when they talk with you. That's when you find out what's on their minds. 9 o'clock on Friday night, Saturday at noon, whenever it may be. We are a government body that meets in public to carry out the government's business. We communicate with our constituents when we're not in that government meeting, be it by phone, face-to-face, email, text, whatever it may be. So I just firmly believe in that is the proper time to communicate. Our meetings have a specific agenda, have a specific purpose, and a time set aside for that purpose. And I just think we need to stick with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Mr. Lacy?
Do we know when the change was made to the policy?
I don't know off the top of my head. I wouldn't look it up.
But like I said, you know, I think if a person wants to come and address us, I think that would look good on us. Why would we not want to allow somebody to come here and to speak to us if they're going to speak nice, polite, and show us respect and show each other respect? Why would we not want to allow free speech? And we just talked about the First Amendment right, and we're all about First Amendment rights. Why would we want to deny somebody the ability to come here and to address us? I mean, I help everybody and anybody that sends me emails, and everybody knows I've helped people outside of my district. If somebody needs help, I'll help them. But sometimes it's appropriate that if they want to come and address us, I think that would be a win for all of us, is transparency, openness. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lacy. Mr. King?
Yeah, you know, maybe these meetings are not the place for us to communicate to constituents, but it's definitely the place where constituents can communicate with us. That's the whole point of the public comments time. I would support updating this policy to include in some form or fashion non-agenda items open for public comments. I feel it's the most efficient way for citizens to voice their concerns to the board. You know, there are several other county boards that do this. Hendersonville does this. Board of Mayor and Aldermen, they do this. Gallatin City Council allows for non-agenda items. These are the two largest cities in our county, and they don't seem to have any trouble with it. It seems to go just fine for them. There's a lot of talking points on this. A lot of reasons to restrict non-agenda items for public comments. For example, it makes the meetings more efficient. You can always email your board member. You can see them after the meeting and talk to them individually. And I think that actually creates some problems. It makes things actually less efficient. Our goal should not be to make our meetings more efficient for us. It should be to make our meetings more efficient for them, for parents and citizens who want to interact with us. And I think that allowing for non-agenda items achieves that. If they send an email, they may not get a response. If they call, members may, if they call us, we may not tell other members in the way they want us to tell them. The whole thing might get lost in translation. If I can address the board with my concern, I can guarantee that my message is going to go the way I want it to go, and it's going to guarantee that I'm heard, and that all of us hear the concern of the citizen. Limiting the speech of citizens also removes accountability and gives the board power and control that they are not intended to have, because they can suppress free speech by preventing anything they don't want citizens to speak about from being on the agenda. And so when you control the agenda, you can control free speech. And that is wholly un-American, in my opinion. And many believe this is the reason this policy was changed. Now, I don't have any proof of that. But going back to that date, February of 2016, what's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, that any policy revision, according to our board policy, requires a second reading. And when this policy was changed, the second reading was waived. And I started looking at, that, the only way that's allowed under our policy is if there's an emergency. And it's, quote, unusual, in a circumstance of unusual urgency. And when I went back and listened to some of the reasons why this policy was changed, a couple of them were, we want to be like the other county boards. We want to be just like them. They all limit non-agenda items. And that wasn't true because Gallatin and Hendersonville both approved it. And, at the time, it was sort of coincidental that this board was involved in a lawsuit that got struck down. Then it got struck down on an appeal. 4 judges ruled against that lawsuit, ruled against the school board in that. And those lawsuits were at great expense to the county. And at the time, there was an attempt, it seemed like an extensive attempt to try to prevent someone from speaking. And it just so happens that during those events that this policy magically appeared on the agenda. And I just didn't think that any of the reasons that I saw, nothing was said in the minutes, constitute an unusual urgency. So I found that to be very, very strange. Representative government is not always efficient. In fact, it's pretty messy. Now, if you want an efficient government, try a tyrannical dictatorship. Try that, because those are very efficient. They can do whatever they want. They can streamline everything. They can listen. They don't have to listen to anybody, right? And there's no accountability. But representative government is messy. It's not supposed to be efficient all the time, and that's That's how the founders wanted it. They wanted the people to speak, and they wanted there to be, they wanted this gridlock. They wanted people to have freedom of speech and freedom of press, and not have those rights be suppressed. I'll quote Thomas Jefferson. He said, "I am against all violations of the Constitution to silence by force and not by reason the complaints or criticisms, just or unjust, of our citizens against the conduct of their agents." So, like I said, I would support adding non-agenda items to the policy. I know it's messy. Sometimes we're going to hear from people things we don't want to hear, including myself, but that is constitutional representative government. This board does not have the power to control, we are not given power to control free speech. That's a power that we're not supposed to have. And so I think there's a way we can do it. I mean, if those other county boards do it, I think we can do it. I spoke to somebody in Williamson County, and they you know, to speak at their meetings, you have to email the board, and they don't even ask what you're going to speak on, and it's time stamped, and so they have a method of that, and people come and speak. Our policy outline gives 30 minutes for public comment. I'd be open to a policy that we allow the, you know, maybe the agenda items to have preference, and then after that we open it up for non-agenda items if there's time. And if there's not time, we let them speak at the next meeting. I think there's a way we can do this that will, that citizens will appreciate. I think we can work together and find a solution to that. So we added this to the agenda tonight. Does this mean that's going to be added to the agenda for voting next week? This is just for discussion. So we can bring in policy revisions, or just to present to the board maybe some ideas. Is that right? We can look at you know, maybe changing the policy on a future study session.
If the board chooses to, the majority of the board chooses to change the policy we want to change, it's the right of the board.
I'm just saying, getting the language of a policy, developing that, is that something we would, I mean, I'm sure we would have to develop that over a series of study sessions, right?
If the appetite of the board is to change it, I don't think there would be any reason to have it on there if the board the majority of the board didn't want to change. But
okay,
you could certainly create your own language and get it to us, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Brown?
One thing I think, personally, I agree, there should be a frame of time in which people can speak on anything. I think it should be short. I think it should be like 15 minutes, and maybe even 3 minutes so we know what they want. That gives us a heads up, because we may be missing out on something we hadn't even considered. We also, and I think this is one reason it was removed, you may not have the answer for them. So you're sitting there, they're asking something, you're like, you know, what's that? We'll have to say, get back to you. But I think there are times that people just want to come forth and make a statement and leave. That's all they want to do. And I attended the city meeting, and they have that. And I think it's just 15 minutes, so that it wouldn't overload. You know, we don't want to get into, I think we have to have a set time. I would not vote for it without a set time, because it could go on forever. And I think that's another reason it went, because it was voted on while I've been here.
Generally aren't, study sessions are
Mr.
pretty
Lacy?
light. What, sir?
You turned your light on, I acknowledged you.
Sorry. Generally, study sessions are real light, generally. I mean, we could possibly do it on a study session. Sometimes we're out of here in 45 minutes or an hour. If you've got 10 speakers wanting to speak on the same book that they don't think is appropriate, well, you could just pick one to speak. You don't have to let all 10 people speak about the same book or say they're complaining about the same book. Just some school boards don't allow people to, if there's somebody already talking about that, well, they can't talk about it too. There's ways that we can make this work and give people a voice. I just think it would be great to give people a voice. But like I said, I would appreciate your consideration on this.
Thank you, Mr. Lacy. Anybody else? All right. We are adjourned.